we're going to just follow up on kind of a focus on first session ideas, in particular in relation to kind of research and clinical perspectives.
Well, one thing I forgot to add to the list, and this is going to vary based on where a therapist is working, is the timing of the first schedule. And so I'd like to begin with like an anecdote of my own experience and then kind of integrate that with research.
Sure.
When I was working at a community mental health center, we were really the only mental health facility in about a 30-mile radius. And often we had a waiting list. And so often a new client would call and make an appointment.
Right.
And most clients, when they make that appointment, they're in a lot of pain.
Right.
They are hurting. They are looking for a resolution. And they would be told, we can see you in 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
Well, by the time of their appointment, for many people, that initial crisis had already passed.
Right.
They were feeling better. And about 50% of our new clients were no-shows.
Right.
And research has found that the quicker you can get a client in,
right,
the proverb, strike while the iron is hot, the more likely that client is to actually make an appointment and engage in therapy. And so I know to some extent, we can't be any quicker in getting clients in, but there are some agencies who have now established walk-in appointments.
Right.
And so I think that is a move in the right direction.
Sure.
Because, again, clients are typically very motivated. If they can simply walk in after something's happened, they can begin to establish a relationship with a treatment center. And the quicker that relationship can be established, the more likely the client is to come back. And so, again, I know logistically in many agencies, we just can't get clients in really quick. But to the extent that it's possible, the sooner we can respond to that client's request for help, the more likely the client will show up. And there's tremendous cost savings if we can reduce no-show rates.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't need to be, an hour and a half intake, but it could almost be like a triage meeting where a professional therapist will meet with the client, hear the client's concerns, and talk about some treatment options.
Makes sense.
And again, can you imagine being in a lot of physical pain, calling for an appointment and being told, we can see you in about a month?
Right, right.
But oftentimes that's what happens to many of our clients, and that they're really hurting, they're in pain, and we give them a date for next month.
Right. And that's certainly the case now with the pandemic. I assume it's the same around you, but here in Western New York, trying to find an open appointment with a therapist quickly is almost impossible. A lot of therapists, and at least in private practice, are not even accepting new patients. So again, to me, that speaks to the under-resourcing of mental health, as well as, the need for strategies for how to see people quickly, as you're talking about.
And building off that, and this is something else I mentioned to you earlier, there's almost this assumption in our treatment community that the first session has to be comprehensive.
Right.
You need to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours really get to know the client. But I wonder if in many situations, a brief appointment of 30 minutes, where the most basic of information is collected,
right,
you can evaluate that client's expectations for treatment, what their needs might be, and then set them up for another type of service.
Right.
Because at an agency, if you're budgeting 2 hours for an intake or even an hour, and the client no-shows, that's a lot of wasted time and wasted productivity.
Right.
And so I think one thing that could really benefit a lot of clients is to offer them almost like a pre-intake.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if with today's technology, some of that could be done online.
Right.
And really, while the client is most motivated for work, they're hurting, to have a conversation with a professional therapist, to have their concerns heard, and to talk about treatment options.
Right.
And I wonder if for some clients, that might be in itself a therapeutic experience.
Sure.
And they might decide, for right now, this is enough.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of possibilities there. One is, as people get used to using Zoom, maybe you could do some of this pre-therapy work by Zoom. That cuts down. We talked about obstacles to therapy, when the simple one being time and transportation. If you can do a pre-interview by phone or Zoom, that may be an option for some people too.
And again, I think one thing we need to do as therapists is to kind of move beyond the notion that you really can't work therapeutically with a client unless you have a comprehensive assessment.
Right.
And getting back to community mental health care, we know in those agencies that the mode of therapy duration is 1 session, and probably the median is around 3 sessions.
Right.
And I know, speaking for myself, I've done a lot of intakes that were very thorough, that were very comprehensive, and the client never came back.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really wonder if all of that is necessary. Now, I know with federal regulations and state regulations, some amount of background information is going to be required.
Right.
But how much of that can we get from an intake form?
Right.
Or an electronic form, so we can really focus on the client?
Right.
What has happened? What are they looking for? As opposed to maybe getting a complicated family history.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, I think that is an issue particularly in some agencies where people spend a lot of time filling out forms. And again, some of the research we've done in terms of looking at working alliance measures that shows people seem to form alliances very quickly. I mean, sometimes people think about alliances only forming when people have been seen for a number of sessions or over a number of weeks, but the data we have suggests people can form it at the first session. And so if your goal is to engage clients in therapy, I would think that has to be at least near the top of your agenda, is to engage clients in a way that helps form that alliance. And paperwork is not that way.
Yeah, and extensively interviewing clients about their educational history, their family history.
Right.
That's typically not the way to an alliance.
Right.
Yeah. And for many clients, go ahead. Well, I think for many clients, they almost come to believe, is this actually therapy? Is doing a psychosocial history and filling out forms, actually therapy? Because my guess is that when they made the appointment, they're thinking, I'm going to get to talk.
Right.
I'm going to get things off my chest. I'm going to get some support. And I know this is not true everywhere, but in many agencies, and probably among some private practitioners too, that first session is more about data collection. It is very clinician structured.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be, but I think a lot of times we train students that the intake is not therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not supposed to be therapeutic.
Right.
But I think a lot of clients have a different perspective. They are looking for a therapeutic encounter.
Right. And I think that kind of encounter could be as simple as good listening skills. Listening well, normalizing the problem if appropriate. I don't know if you may not be old enough to have seen the Gloria tapes with Rogers, Pearls, and Ellis, but if you saw the Rogers tape in particular, he was excellent at getting information in a non-directive way, so that he was essentially developing the alliance in addition to information gathering. Now, obviously, most people can't be Rogers, but I think it's a good model for how you can do both at the same time. And again, the point you and I have both been focused on is how many people don't seem to realize how many people drop out quickly from therapy, and how that the early sessions are essentially almost like a taxiing, it's like an airplane taxiing to take off, when our perspective looking at the data is the beginning is crucial, both in terms of you've talked about how one session may be therapeutic enough for a client, and it also prepares them for further work and for engaging in counseling.
And again, I think something we talked about in our first video is, as therapists, we have the curse of knowledge. We know what therapy is supposed to look like. We know how long it is supposed to last. But for many of our clients, especially those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they don't really understand the nature of psychotherapy.
Right.
They are not necessarily expecting a long-term relationship.
Right.
When I was talking with some clients a few years ago when I was working at Community Mental Health Center, it seemed that a lot of my clients did not have the expectation that they would come back. Not because I'm like really bad, although that's a possibility, but it was almost like, just like going to see a medical doctor.
Right.
You don't necessarily schedule a follow-up.
Right. They give you drugs and you're on your way.
And so I think for a lot of these clients, they didn't have the expectation that we would be working possibly every week over a significant amount of time.
Right.
And in my way of thinking, we need to let clients know about what therapy can and can't do so they can make an informed decision. So maybe for some clients, they just want a session or two to get things off their chest, to get some support, to listen to a non-judgmental person who can help them think through some issues. But for those clients who are really wanting more substantial change, research has shown that typically 10, 20 sessions are typically needed to help them get there.
Right.
And again, the typical client doesn't know that.
Right.
And so I think it's our responsibility to let them know what therapy can offer, and given your particular goals, approximately how long we might need to meet.
That excellent idea.
But again, I think a lot of times as therapists, and I've been guilty of this too, we make the assumption that clients understand the nature of therapy.
Right.
And even our clients who have been former clients before, if they haven't been a client with you, they might not know how you operate. And so especially, we're talking about that first session, rather than spending so much time talking about family history, I think more time should be focused talking about on therapy, what the client wants, what is the client willing to invest, and really kind of coming up with almost like a pseudo contract.
Yeah.
And, I wish I'd come up with this idea, and I can't think who to give the credit to, but it's the notion of session contracting.
Mm-hmm.
You might say to a client, would you be willing to work on this for at least 2 sessions? Now, I think a lot of clients would not be able to make a commitment to an unlimited number of sessions.
Right.
But for those clients who might be a little bit ambivalent, they might agree, yeah, let's meet a couple more times, and then we'll evaluate how things are going. But I think clients need to know there's an endpoint. Not we're going to work on this for the indeterminate future, but rather let's come up with a plan for a meeting for maybe 2 or 3 more sessions. And I think that's an easier commitment for clients to make.
Right. Although I will disagree with you, or at least put an asterisk there, because I think there's a subset of clients that use therapy for social support, use it for maintenance. And in some ways, the indeterminate nature, kind of the ongoing aspect of therapy is something they want. But we may be talking about a different group of clients, patients here than the ones you're talking about.
But again, I think you made a good point, but in either case, having the conversation, what level of commitment are you willing to make?
Right.
And, for some of those clients who are looking for a long-term relationship, they'll let you know.
Right. Yeah, and some time limit may, people who are interested in brief therapy, I think, believe that the time limit can be a motivator for folks of, here's what we're going to try to accomplish in this amount of time, rather than having it open-ended and no push to make progress.
And I think this is something I think as a therapist, I've not appreciated fully, but therapy is an investment.
Mm-hmm.
Clients are giving up their time. They are putting themselves in a vulnerable position. Often they are paying a lot of money. Currently, right now, I'm supervising a licensed professional counselor. She does not accept insurance, and she charges $130 an hour. Unless you're a relatively wealthy person, paying $130 a week is a significant amount of money.
Right. Or you have very good insurance.
Yeah. And so I think one thing we can do is really try to put ourselves in the client's perspective and what do they want? What are they willing to invest? And also recognize that for many clients, this is something they want to get over with.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott, you're right. There are a lot of clients who are looking for a longer term relationship. But for many clients, it's almost like it's a necessary evil. I don't want to be here.
Right.
But I know I'm hurting. And the sooner we can get this over with, the better.
No, when I was in graduate school, I did my own personal therapy, and I did it with a psychoanalytic therapist. And I know I went in basically looking for something sort of short-term, quick and dirty. And he basically said, here's how I do therapy. And it's more long-term. In my case, I want to say we did about 4 or 5 months. And I found it very helpful. But again, my therapist kind of educated me about if we were going to go down this road, we would need some time. It wasn't going to be the 1 or 2 sessions that I would have preferred. So yeah, lots of individual differences among people.
And again, I think it's really important just to talk about those openly.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of assuming that you and the client are on the same page, what are they really looking for, and what are their expectations for a therapeutic relationship?
Right. Yeah, and doing, say, 3 sessions, 6 sessions with folks may make it clear to both the therapist and the client if longer term therapy is needed. As you talk more deeply and people self-disclose more about what's going on in their lives, so the kind of the parameters of the problems they're coming in with are likely to become clear with a few sessions. It's that may be part of the working alliance issue too, is that people sometimes are not willing to self-disclose all of their major issues to a relative stranger in a short period of time. I mean, they may be everything from just being more introverted to some questions, at least implicit doubt about the confidentiality of what's going on. So I don't think it's unusual for problems to get deepened and redefined with more sessions.
And I think, for clients who do remain engaged in therapy, the therapeutic alliance is renegotiated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not just, a one-time agreement, but oftentimes clients will discover new things about themselves or new areas they want to work on. And so the client and therapist will renegotiate, why are we here?
Right.
What are we doing? And what do we want to accomplish?
Right.
I think the key is just being very explicit with clients and really trying to get all your assumptions out in the open So you and the client exactly know what is our endpoint here and what do we hope to accomplish.
Right. Yep. If we were going to try to sum up what we've talked about today, maybe one major point, what would it be for you?
I think the one point for me is we typically teach our students to thoroughly explore the presenting problem. But I think we need to focus more on what is the client looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this also builds back into your research on the therapeutic alliance. There needs to be an emotional bond. There needs to be an agreement on the goals of therapy and the task to get there.
Right.
And I think oftentimes as therapists, when we hear the problem, we think about all the things we can do to help with that.
Right.
But what's really crucial is, what is the client willing to invest? What is the client willing to work on for how long? And really coming together as a team around what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm. And
kind of building on that, it's kind of like a second point, that agreement should never be static.
Right.
Rather, the alliance needs to be renegotiated
mm-hmm.
as things change.
Right. Yep, makes sense. The other thing, and summing up, that I wanted to point out is, we exchanged outlines, or you created a good outline for our talk today, and I liked one of your favorite counseling quotes from Kotler and Balkin in 2017. The single most important goal of a first counseling session is to get the client to return for another one. And again, I think that acknowledges the reality of, quick dropout, quick termination for many people when they don't get what they expect or want in therapy. But again, I think most therapists and even educators, clinical educators and researchers don't quite understand how many important processes are going on early in therapy, both in terms of quick dropout, issues around expectations for what should happen in therapy, and also decreases in client distress or lack thereof, and the implications for clients who, experience a huge decrease in distress, and are they motivated to come back? And is that useful or not for them? So I think, so far, one of the themes that you and I think, returning to is, let's not treat therapy as just the intervention phase, wherever it is down the road, but pay more attention to what's going on early on, and maybe think about restructuring some of that, both in terms of our training and how we deal with people at agencies and other settings to do a better job of engaging clients and being helpful to them.
And building off that quote, I think there's a couple of things that we can do as therapists to increase the likelihood of clients coming for that second session.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, make the first session meaningful.
Right.
Do not make
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, right.
A dry history collection endeavor. Really kind of meet their expectations for support, for encouragement, opportunities for catharsis. And this is just something I was reading about the other day, and I wish I could give credit where credit's due, but the importance of outcome expectations. Let clients know a little bit about the research behind psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly true that for most clients, it is a helpful experience.
Right.
But again, if you're a client and you've reluctantly attended your first session, there's a lot of history taking, and you have no idea if this is going to work or not.
Right.
I don't think you're likely to come. I wouldn't be likely to come back. And so clients really need almost to be a little bit excited or hopeful about what they can do,
right,
for all the sacrifices they're making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it may even be something as simple as engaging them in the first session and giving them some homework or something small to do that helps give them some motivation and hope for coming back to a second session, if that's what we think is appropriate.